Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We love it when you send us books that really hit home, and this one definitely
Yeah,
does.
this one's a good one.
It's How to Finish Everything You Start by Jan Yager. And we're going to, well, dive deep into it today because I think we all have that list, right?
Oh, yeah.
Those good intentions that just never quite made it across the finish line.
We've all been there for sure.
So let's unpack this. Why is it so hard to finish things? And maybe even more importantly, what can we actually do about it? Get some
Yeah.
strategy, some tactics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real thing. The book calls it unfinished tasks or project syndrome. Kind of a mouthful, but it's kind of like an epidemic, really.
It is. It's everywhere.
hmm
And I think the book does a good job of pointing out some of the core reasons right off the bat, like trying to do too much at once. And then there's this great phrase, distractionitis.
Oh, yeah. Distractionitis. That's a good one.
It's like that feeling of constantly being pulled in different directions, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's like we can't focus. We start something and then something else pops up. Or our phone beeps or whatever.
Exactly. And, it's one thing to just kind of be annoyed with ourselves for not finishing things, but the book points out some pretty significant consequences,
Oh,
right?
sure. Yeah.
Like if you've got home projects that are just dragging on forever, that can really impact your daily life.
Absolutely.
Or in a professional setting, it could even put your job at risk, or at least affect your team's performance. I thought it was really interesting that the book mentions a survey where 39% of people said they find it difficult to finish tasks.
Yeah, that's a pretty big chunk of people, right?
Yeah. But then there was also about 20% who said just getting started is the biggest hurdle. So it's not just about finishing.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. Some people struggle with initiating things, while others have a hard time seeing them through. It's like two sides of the same coin, but with different obstacles.
So today, on this deep dive, we want to dig into the causes, right? And especially pull out some actual strategy, things that our listeners can take away and use to finally finish those tasks and projects that are important to them.
Exactly. So we'll look at the internal obstacles that hold us back, but also practical ways to take control, manage our time, our goals, and we'll even touch on those times when maybe not finishing is actually the best decision.
Right. Sometimes it's okay to walk away.
Exactly.
So let's jump right in.
Okay, so the book starts by looking inward. It has this whole chapter on 22 beliefs, behaviors, or bad habits that may be stopping you from finishing. And it really emphasizes that the reasons we don't finish things are often within us, not just external factors.
Right. It's about our own mindset and habits.
Exactly.
And it's a pretty broad list. There's the obvious ones like fear of failure, but then it also mentions fear of success, which I thought was interesting. And then there's perfectionism, procrastination, poor planning, that feeling of being overwhelmed by too many commitments.
Right, like our to-do list is just a mile long.
Exactly. And it even gets into things like how disorganization can derail us, or emotional stress, even anger. And some people might think working under pressure is a good thing, but the book actually suggests it can often be counterproductive.
It's true. Sometimes that pressure just makes things worse.
And of course, we can't forget about the distractions of modern life, TV, internet, social media.
The digital age, right? It's full of
Oh,
distractions.
yeah. And it even mentions things like consistently being late as a possible sign of deeper issues. And finally, it talks about how sometimes overvaluing ourselves or our goals can actually make it harder to finish things.
Yeah, that's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Like the more important we think something is, the more pressure we put on ourselves and the more likely we are to stall out.
It's almost like we psych ourselves out.
Exactly.
So, okay, that's a lot of internal obstacles. But the book thankfully dives deeper into a few of them, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, I was really fascinated by the suggestions for dealing with fear of failure and fear of success.
So what did it say about that?
Well, it suggests actually visualizing the worst case scenario if you fail. Like, really think it through and then think about how you would cope.
Okay, so kind of face your fears head on.
Yeah. But then it says to do the same thing for success. Imagine what achieving that goal would look like and how you would handle the changes it might bring.
So you're prepared either way.
Right. I think the idea is that often our fears are kind of vague and amplified in our minds. But when we force ourselves to actually picture them concretely, they lose some of their power.
Yeah, that makes sense. And imagining success can help you anticipate any potential challenges or anxieties that might come with actually achieving your goals.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a mental rehearsal for different outcomes.
I like that.
Another big one the book tackles is perfectionism.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And it's not just about being a little bit picky. It points out how this constant striving for impossible standards can actually have really negative effects.
Oh, absolutely, in all sorts of areas.
Like in the workplace, it can create this really tense environment and lead to high employee turnover.
Right, because no one can ever meet those unrealistic expectations.
Exactly. And in parenting, it can contribute to insecurity in children. And in our personal lives, it can really damage our relationships.
Yeah, because you're always focused on what's wrong, never on what's good.
Right. So the book's advice here is really practical. It says aim for attainable excellence rather than this elusive idea of perfect.
Yeah, because perfect doesn't exist, right?
Exactly.
Attainable excellence, though, that's something you can actually work towards.
Right. And then there's poor planning, which the book says often boils down to underestimating how much time things will actually take.
Oh, I am so guilty of that.
Oh, me too. It uses this really vivid example from Edward Yordan's book, Death March, about IT projects with crazy compressed timelines.
Death March. Sounds intense.
Yeah, and the book uses it to illustrate just how badly things can go when we don't accurately account for the time involved.
Yeah, poor planning can have some serious consequences. I guess that's why they call it a death march, huh?
Yeah, it's like a warning sign.
Yeah.
And then there's the number one reason people don't finish things, according to the author's survey:
Drum roll, please.
taking on too many tasks.
Oh, yeah, classic overcommitment.
Right. A whopping 30.54% of people said this is their main problem. And it was the top reason in both the U.S. and India.
So it's not just a cultural thing, it's pretty universal.
Yeah. And, it makes sense when you think about how much is constantly coming at us.
Oh, yeah, totally.
The book makes this great analogy about old-fashioned physical mail versus the constant flood of email. Back in the day, you'd get your mail, deal with it, and that was it. But email, it's just this never-ending stream of demands.
I know, it's like you can never escape your inbox.
Right. And it's not just email. It's all the notifications, the messages, the updates.
The constant pinging and buzzing.
It's exhausting. And it's no wonder we have trouble focusing and finishing things when we're constantly being bombarded.
Yeah, no wonder at all.
And then, the book talks about how our emotional state can really impact our ability to finish things. If we're going through emotional turmoil or feeling angry, it can be really hard to stay on track.
Yeah, it's hard to focus when you're feeling overwhelmed emotionally.
Right. So it emphasizes the importance of finding healthy ways to cope with those feelings. Taking a walk, meditation, anything that helps you process and release those emotions.
Right, so they don't just sit there and fester.
Exactly. And along similar lines, it talks about how working under pressure can actually be counterproductive for a lot of people.
Yeah, some people thrive under pressure, but I think for most of us, it just makes things more stressful.
Yeah. And the book suggests that a more consistent, steady approach is often more effective. That whole slow and steady wins the race thing.
I like that.
And of course, we can't forget about the digital distractions we talked about earlier. TV, video games, the internet, email, social media, they're all major time sinks.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to get sucked into those things and lose track of time.
Right. And the book suggests doing some self-monitoring to track how much time you're actually spending on these activities. I was blown away by this statistic. Apparently, Americans check their phones an average of 80 times a day.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, no wonder it's so hard to focus.
I wonder it all.
And finally, the book points out that lateness, consistently turning things in late, can sometimes be a symptom of deeper issues like perfectionism or a fear of not meeting expectations.
Yeah, it's not always just about poor time management.
Right. And it also mentions this interesting idea that sometimes overvaluing ourselves or our goals can actually make it harder to finish things.
It's like that whole, the higher you climb, the harder you fall thing, right?
Yeah, I think the idea is that sometimes by lowering the stakes a little bit in our minds, we can actually reduce the pressure and make it easier to get things done.
So taking some of the pressure off can actually help us move forward.
Yeah, that's the idea.
So, okay, we've talked a lot about the internal obstacles to finishing things, but the book doesn't just leave us hanging, right?
No, thankfully
Yeah,
not.
what?
It moves on to part 2, which is all about cures, proactive strategies to regain control and actually finish what we start.
Okay, so what's the first step?
Well, it starts with something really fundamental: goal setting and prioritization.
Right, because if you don't know what you're aiming for, how can you hit the target?
Exactly. The book stresses the importance of having clearly defined goals, both short-term and long-term, to help you make decisions about what to focus on and what to actually bring to completion.
So having that roadmap, knowing where you're going is crucial.
Exactly. And it references Stephen Covey's concept of begin with the end in mind from the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. You know, that image of the leader climbing to the top of the tallest tree only to realize they're in the wrong jungle.
Ouch, that's gonna hurt.
Right. So it's about having that vision, that clear sense of where you want to end up so you don't waste time and energy going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, so you don't end up in the wrong jungle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the book gets into some practical goal-setting frameworks, like the SMART acronym.
Oh yeah, SMART goals. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-related. And it also mentions the expanded SMARTER framework, which includes evaluated and revised.
Okay, so you're not just setting vague goals, you're really breaking them down and making them concrete.
Right. Like instead of saying, I want to get in shape, you'd say, I want to lose 10 pounds by June 30th.
Okay, that's much more specific.
And the relevance part is really important too, because it's about making sure your goals align with your values and what you actually want to achieve, not just what you think you should be doing.
Yeah, so you're not just going through the motions, you're actually working towards something that matters to you.
Exactly. And then to make those big goals feel less overwhelming, the book emphasizes breaking them down into smaller, more manageable tasks.
Right, so you're not just staring at this huge mountain, you're taking it one step at a time.
Exactly. And then after you've got your goals broken down, it's all about prioritization.
Okay, so figuring out what needs to happen first.
Right. And the book mentions a couple of helpful tools for this. First, there's Covey's 4-quadrant matrix, which is all about identifying what's urgent and what's important. You know, sometimes we get so caught up in urgent but not important tasks that we neglect the things that really matter.
Yeah, it's like putting out fires all day instead of working on the things that will actually move you forward.
Exactly. And then it mentions Pareto's 80-20 rule, which reminds us that often 80% of our results come from just 20% of our efforts.
So it's about identifying those high-impact activities and focusing on them.
Exactly. And then the book introduces its own framework for taking action, which is the actionable plan.
Okay, I like acronyms. What does actionable stand for?
Well, A is for assess, which is all about taking stock of all your unfinished tasks and figuring out what truly needs your attention first. C is for control, which is about taking charge of your commitments and your environment, both physical and digital, to minimize distractions.
Right, so you're creating a space where you can actually focus.
Exactly. T is for target, which emphasizes focusing on one specific task at a time to avoid the pitfalls of multitasking. I is for innovate, which encourages you to be open to new ideas and tools that could help you work more efficiently.
So always be looking for ways to improve your process.
Right. O is for organize, which covers everything from managing your research materials to grouping similar tasks together.
Okay, so getting your ducks in a row, so to speak.
Exactly. And finally, N is for now. It's that reminder to overcome procrastination and just take action.
No more excuses.
Exactly. So the actionation plan provides this really nice step-by-step approach to actually getting things done. And then the book dives even deeper into practical strategies, introducing another great acronym, FINISH.
Okay, tell me about FINISH.
Well, F stands for focus on one priority task at a time. I is for ignore interruptions and distractions. N is for now, as in take action now, don't put it off. The second I stands for initiate and innovate, meaning find new and better ways to approach your work. S is for stay the course, even when things get tough. And H is for hail finishing, meaning celebrate your accomplishment.
I love that last one. We should definitely celebrate our wins, big or small.
Right. It's all about positive reinforcement.
Absolutely.
And then the book talks about this idea of hidden time, those little pockets of time throughout the day that we often waste without even realizing it.
Like waiting in line or commuting.
Exactly. And it encourages us to be more intentional with that time, to use it for things like note-taking, work, relaxation, exercise, or even just mentally reviewing our goals.
So turning those wasted moments into productive ones.
Exactly. It also suggests keeping time logs to get a clearer picture of how we're actually spending our time.
Yeah, that can be really eye-opening. Sometimes you're like, wait, where did all my time go?
Right. And then it emphasizes the importance of learning to say no. You know, overcommitting ourselves is a major reason we don't finish things, so setting boundaries is crucial.
It's so hard to say no sometimes, though.
I know. But the book stresses that it's not about being unhelpful or rude. It's about respecting your own limits and prioritizing your time. And it even gives you 20 different ways to say no politely and effectively.
Okay, that's helpful. I could use some tips on that.
Me too. And then closely related to saying no is the idea of becoming a better delegator. Learning to leverage the skills of others to free up your own time and energy.
Right, because you don't have to do everything yourself.
Exactly. The book gives you 8 steps to effective delegation, from figuring out what to delegate, to choosing the right person, to providing clear instructions and fostering trust.
That's really helpful. I think a lot of people struggle with delegation.
Yeah, it can be tricky, but it's such a valuable skill to master. And then to bring all these concepts together, the book uses this really relatable example of writing a book.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it walks you through how to apply all these strategies to this specific task, which can feel really overwhelming.
Yeah, writing a book is no joke.
Right. So it talks about breaking the book down into smaller chunks, dealing with procrastination, rewarding yourself for milestones, managing perfectionism, addressing fears of failure and success, creating internal motivation, dispelling the myth of not having enough time, and the importance of staying the course and celebrating the final completion.
So it's basically a case study in applying all the strategies we've been talking about.
Exactly. And then there's this really interesting chapter on when failing to finish is a good thing.
Huh, that's interesting. You mean like sometimes it's okay to quit?
Well, not exactly quit. It's more about making a conscious decision to stop pursuing something that's no longer serving you.
Oh, okay, so it's not about giving up. It's about choosing your battles wisely.
Right. It emphasizes the importance of being proactive and making a deliberate choice to stop, rather than just abandoning something out of frustration or defeat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It also uses the example of applying for a Fulbright scholarship. Sometimes you start something with a lot of enthusiasm, but then your priorities change or you realize it's not the right fit for you anymore. And that's okay.
Yeah. It's better to recognize that and move on than to keep investing time and energy into something that's no longer aligned with your goals.
Exactly. And then it talks about some more practical stuff like managing paperwork and digital files and the importance of having a system and backups so you don't lose important information.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'm always afraid of losing important files.
Me too. And then it makes this really important point about finishing communication loops. Responding to emails, returning calls, replying to texts. It seems small, but it can really make a difference in your relationships and your overall sense of well-being.
Yeah, it's so frustrating when people don't respond to messages.
Right. And it can really pile up and create this feeling of being overwhelmed.
So closing those loops is important for our own peace of mind, too.
Exactly. And then the book moves into the topic of seeking help.
Okay, so when you need some extra support.
Right. It talks about how undiagnosed ADHD can sometimes play a role in difficulties with finishing tasks. And it specifically mentions the symptom of inattention as being particularly relevant.
So having trouble focusing and staying on track.
Exactly. And it quotes Terry Matlin, who talks about how ADHD can affect executive function, which is basically the brain's project manager, responsible for planning, organization, and getting things started.
So if your project manager is struggling, it's no wonder you have trouble finishing things.
Right. And then it mentions some suggestions from Hallowell for managing ADT, attention deficit trait, in the workplace, like focusing on positive emotions, taking care of your physical health, being organized, and consciously slowing down to improve focus.
Those are all good tips for anyone, really, not just people with ADHD.
Yeah, I think so too. And then it suggests seeking help from professional organizers or even working with a project manager, especially for entrepreneurs who might need some extra support with prioritization.
Right, so you're not in it alone.
Exactly. And for leaders who are struggling to motivate their teams to finish tasks, it offers some really practical advice, like recommending books on team productivity, facilitating workshops, implementing reward systems, having regular check-ins with team members, and adopting practices like daily stand-up meetings to keep everyone on track.
Okay, so it's about creating a culture of completion within the team.
Exactly. And then as we wrap up, the book offers some top tips for finishing. Bring us back to that FINISH acronym.
Right, those core principles.
Exactly. It also emphasizes the importance of using your judgment when applying these strategies, because what works for one person or one project might not work for another. And it reminds us to always prioritize human connections, even amidst our efforts to get things done.
Yeah, because relationships are important.
Absolutely. It also encourages a positive mindset and using affirmations like I can finish to build confidence. And it briefly mentions another acronym, DOIENOW, which stands for Define, Open, Identify, Time, Note, Observe, and Work.
Okay, so it's all about taking action and breaking things down into smaller steps.
Exactly. And finally, the book stresses the importance of knowing yourself, understanding your own energy levels and work style, and scheduling your most important tasks accordingly.
Right, because we all work differently.
Exactly. And it reminds us to always prioritize that one most important task and to break down those big bucket list goals into smaller steps.
So one step at a time.
Exactly. And it ends with this really inspiring quote from David Carradine. There are no failures in Hollywood, only people who give up too soon.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into how to finish everything you start, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest one is that there are a lot of reasons why we might struggle to finish things. Some of them are internal, some of them are external. But the good news is that there are also a lot of practical strategies we can use to overcome these challenges and actually get things done.
I agree, and I think it's important to remember that becoming a better finisher is a skill. It's something we can learn and improve over time.
Absolutely. It's not about being perfect, it's about progress.
Exactly. So think about your own unfinished list. What's one strategy from today's discussion that you could start implementing right now?
Yeah, what's one small change you can make today that will set you on a path to completion?
And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know what other books or topics you'd like us to explore in future deep dives.
Yeah, keep those suggestions coming.
Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.